Welcome to part 3 of our discussion around The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, the economics classic. Now we're going to get a little deeper into the question surrounding the wages of labour. Why do people choose to work for an entrepreneur? Why isn't everybody an entrepreneur? If you think about it, there is massive risk involved with any entrepreneurial adventure. They have to save up a lot of capital without any certainty they're actually going to make any profit at the end. Even if they do make a profit, it won't be immediately. They may have to wait months or years to begin making their money back. The employee, on the other hand, gets an advance in the form of a wage right from the off. And that's regardless of whether the business makes a profit in that same time period. What the employee loses in exchange is the profit made from the sale of the good or service they produced. What they're really getting is time. Employees tend to have what we call high time preference, which means they prefer present goods now to later on. If you happen to need to pay bills today, then working for an employer might seem like quite a good idea. Your wage as an employee will be somewhere in between what your employer is willing to pay and what you're willing to work for. The latter could be negotiated through a union. If we are in the same growing economy we were talking about before, there will be more employers competing for your labour. This will allow you to negotiate your wage higher. In such a situation, the general wage level tends to rise, as well as working conditions. If your employer feels like they can't raise your wage, he may sweeten the deal by giving you air conditioning or some other improvement to your working condition. At this point, Adam Smith zooms out to a general level and he points out the burgeoning economy of America in 1776, where working conditions and lifestyle are not as sweet as it is in England at that time, but they are growing much faster. In such a place, having lots of children is no longer a burden, but can be a source of abundance. By comparison, we can look to somewhere like China, where economic growth has been stagnant, and people's standard of living has remained pretty much the same up to that point for hundreds of years. Then we have economies that are neither growing nor stagnant, that seem to be actively declining. And that seems to be the case mostly in command economies at the time, somewhere like Bengali, modern-day Bangladesh, which was run by the monopolist, the East India Trading Company. They were pillaging from the Bengalis so frequently, there were mass shortages and famine. To this day, Bangladesh is one of the poorest countries in the world. So to sum up, here's what's happening when an economy is growing. There is greater overall specialisation and wealth. Prices of goods are falling. Wages of labour are rising, and so are working conditions. Labour-saving devices are becoming more efficient, which in turn makes labour more productive and raising the productivity of the economy as a whole. If these things aren't happening, you know something is wrong. Then we're getting to a hot topic of the moment: inequality. And Smith argues that there will be inevitably some inequality depending on what people choose to do for work. There are, in Smith's mind, 5 things that will make wages higher. First of all, the relative agreeableness of the job will have an effect. The more agreeable a job is, the less you might get paid for it. And agreeable meaning enjoyable, less taxing on the muscles, less disgusting, I suppose. There are some pretty horrible jobs out there. Another aspect is how easy it is to learn, how long it takes to actually learn to do the thing that you're being employed for. Obviously, the more time you invest in it means that there's a greater sacrifice on your part. Because it takes so long to learn to do that task, there necessarily will be a lower supply of that kind of employee. Another factor is consistency of work. For example, mine workers won't necessarily be working year-long round. It all depends on whether they can actually find anything to mine. If you know that your work is going to be consistent, you're probably not going to be paid as much. But at least it's consistent. And then finally we have the probability of success. All of these represent risk. The higher the risk, the more you are likely to get paid. And that basically concludes book 1 of The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. To summarise, we've talked about the division of labour, economic growth, capital accumulation, international trade, where value comes from, why people would choose to work for an employer, and what the role of the employer is. Please check out the book. We're going to move on to book 2 on the next episode. Think about some of those questions we asked at the beginning. Why are some countries rich and why are some countries poor? Who's really benefiting from an exchange? Is it really in our best interests to specialise or to diversify? It's not hard to see why The Wealth of Nations has become such an influential book, as it does begin to shed light on some of the world's biggest mysteries on a macro scale. If I was going to highlight the most important idea that Adam Smith has brought forward in The Wealth of Nations, I would say it was this idea surrounding the baker and his benevolence or his selfishness. Whether we should expect the baker to give us what we want because of his benevolence, or because he just wants to make money. And I think all of the things we've discussed derive from this essential debate, and also this conflict of visions. And I think you'll find that everybody who opposes Smith on principle, and I'm not talking about Rothbard, I think it will come down to this conflict of visions, which we may talk about in other episodes of this economic series. Either way, let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time for book 2. This has been James Smith for Life. See you next time.